My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I'm 36 years old. And until one toast at my father's 62nd birthday party, I genuinely believed I had a place in my family that couldn't be replaced. I used to think loyalty counted for something. That time mattered. That sweat and sleepless nights, missed vacations, canceled plans, coming home with my hair still smelling like stale office coffee, meant I was building a future. Not just a business, a legacy. Let me set the scene. My dad, Richard, loves a big celebration. The kind of party where the house looks like a magazine spread and the guests are a mix of family, friends, and business associates who smile too hard because they're always half networking. His 62nd birthday was no exception. The music was just loud enough to feel festive. The food was expensive enough that everyone made little impressed noises when they tasted it. Drinks were flowing, laughter bouncing from room to room like nothing in the world could go wrong. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself relax. Because I'd done my part. I'd been working in my dad's company for the past 12 years. 12 years of showing up early and leaving late. 12 years of handling client relationships, managing the team, smoothing over disasters before they became headlines, keeping the day-to-day operations from collapsing under the weight of other people's egos. I wasn't just an employee, I was the backbone. And I thought, eventually, that would be recognized. I thought I was set. I thought I'd inherit the company one day, the way any loyal family member might expect after putting in the work. I didn't need a parade. I didn't need a crown. I just needed the quiet certainty that my father saw me, that he knew what I'd given up to help him build his dream. My boyfriend Daniel was beside me most of the night. He's the kind of man who reads a room without speaking, steady, observant. He'd been supportive in that calm way that doesn't demand applause. He just stays. Every time someone from the company came over to shake my hand, Daniel would give me that small smile that said, "You earned this." I clung to that. Then my dad stood up to make a toast. Everyone quieted, forks lowered. Conversations died mid-sentence. I expected the usual. Jokes about getting older, a heartfelt thank you, maybe a sentimental line about retirement someday in the distant future. But when he lifted his glass, his eyes didn't land on me. They swept the room like he was looking for permission. Then he said it. I'm happy to say that after much thought and discussion, I'm ready to retire in a few months. A ripple moved through the crowd, soft gasps, claps starting before the sentence even finished. My pulse spiked. Retire. Okay, sure. I'd known it was coming eventually. But then he continued. And I've decided to pass the torch of CEO to someone who I think will take the company to new heights. I felt my breath catch. This strange, involuntary inhale like my body already knew something my mind hadn't accepted yet. The room leaned in. My dad smiled. My grandson, Mike. For a second, I swear the sound vanished, like someone pressed mute on the entire party. I froze. Not just surprised, stunned, like my brain refused to translate the words into reality. Mike, 22 years old, fresh out of business school, a shiny degree, a confident handshake, a habit of talking about vision like it was a magic spell. And yes, he was family. He was also my nephew, my older sister's son, a kid I'd watched grow up at holiday dinners, asking for extra dessert and complaining about having to put his phone down at the table. A kid who had never spent a single night dealing with a payroll crisis or an angry client or a staff member sobbing in the break room because their marriage was falling apart and they couldn't focus. Yet somehow, he was the future. Applause exploded around the room. People cheered. Someone shouted, "Congratulations!" The clapping felt like it was hitting me in the chest, over and over, like the entire room was celebrating my erasure. I forced my face into something neutral, something polite. Inside, I was on fire. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might actually throw up. Daniel leaned toward me, voice low. "Evelyn, are you okay?" I nodded automatically, because that's what I've always done. Perform. Be composed. Don't make a scene. But my hands had gone cold. My heart was pounding like it wanted out. I didn't hate Mike. I need to be clear about that. Mike could be decent. At family gatherings, he'd joke around, laugh loud, tell people about his business classes like he was already running the world. He wasn't cruel in the obvious ways. But he was young, inexperienced. And I knew, because I'd lived it, that a company doesn't survive on confidence and a degree. It survives on the ugly stuff no one sees, the decisions that keep people employed, the compromises that keep clients loyal, the boring, brutal discipline of showing up even when you're exhausted. And that was my territory. 12 years of it. But apparently that didn't count for much. After the toast, the party continued like nothing had happened. People drifted back into conversations. Mike was surrounded by congratulators, laughing like he'd expected this all along. My father looked proud. My mother looked relieved, like a decision had finally been made and the burden of choosing was off her shoulders. And my sister looked like she'd won something. That was the detail that lodged in my throat like a splinter. Because I had a sudden, sick realization. This wasn't a spontaneous choice. This had been discussed, argued, strategized, and I hadn't even been invited into the room where it mattered. When Daniel touched my elbow again, I whispered, "Not here, later." He didn't push, just nodded, eyes sharp with concern. That night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum, I confronted my dad privately. I wanted to believe there was an explanation that didn't gut me, that maybe Mike was a figurehead and I'd still be heavily involved, that maybe this was a ceremonial announcement and the real structure was different. I wanted a reason to stop feeling like I'd been slapped in front of everyone I'd ever worked with. But my dad didn't give me that. He doubled down. He told me he believed Mike was the right choice because he was young, full of fresh ideas, and had a degree. A freaking degree. Meanwhile, I'd been the one building relationships with clients, managing the team, handling day-to-day operations for over a decade. And then, like it was nothing, he said, "You can still work with him, mentor him, show him the ropes." That was it. That was the moment something inside me went silent. Not rage at first, more like clarity. I stared at my father and realized he didn't see me as a successor. He saw me as a worker, a loyal, dependable worker who would swallow her pride and keep the machine running, even if someone else sat in the chair. I told him I couldn't stay. There was no way I'd work under Mike after everything I'd done. It wasn't even about the money or the title anymore. It was the principle. I had earned that position. I deserved it. And being told I wasn't even considered, being offered a mentor role like a consolation prize, felt like being erased while I was still standing there. The next couple of days were a blur. My parents tried to talk me out of quitting. They said I was being dramatic. They said I needed to think about the family. But all I could think was, if my own family doesn't value me, why am I bleeding for them? So I handed in my resignation. I packed up my office, and I walked away. Walking out of that building for the last time felt like cutting off a limb. I knew every inch of that place. The conference room where we'd closed our biggest deals, the hallway where I'd paced during crisis calls, the break room where employees had confessed their fears to me because they trusted me. It wasn't just a job. It was a piece of my life. Daniel was waiting in the parking lot when I came out carrying a box with my desk items. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just stepped forward and took the weight from my arms, like he understood I'd been carrying it for years. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. And the worst part? His support meant the world, because it felt like the rest of my family had chosen someone else. I didn't know it then, not really, but that toast wasn't just announcing a new CEO. It was announcing my place in the family, useful, replaceable, silent. And I was done being silent. For the first few days after I quit, I walked around like my body didn't know what to do without the constant pressure of being needed. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. out of habit, stare at the ceiling, and feel this strange emptiness where urgency used to live. No emails, no client fires to put out, no staff problems to solve, no one calling me because the deal was collapsing and only I knew how to stitch it back together. Just silence. At first, I thought the silence would feel peaceful. It didn't. It felt like grief. Daniel tried to soften it for me. He'd make coffee, open the curtains, coax me into little routines, grocery runs, walks after dinner, movie nights where he'd pause the screen and glance at me like he was checking whether my mind had drifted back to that office again. Because it always did. I kept replaying the moment my father said Mike's name. My grandson Mike. As if I hadn't existed in that company at all. As if 12 years of my life were just background noise. The betrayal was the hardest part, and not because I'd lost a title. Because I'd lost what I thought was a bond. When my dad and I first started building the business, we were close. I'd given up a better-paying career path to help him. I believed in him. I believed in us. And now it felt like he'd thrown me away for a shiny degree and a kid with a confident smile. The first few weeks were brutal. I avoided family gatherings. I didn't answer my mom's calls. My dad even showed up at my house once, unannounced, like he could corner me back into obedience. "Evelyn, don't be like this," he'd said at my front door, voice low like he was talking to a teenager, not a 36-year-old woman who'd held his company together. "I'm not being like anything," I replied, my hand still on the doorknob. "I'm choosing myself." He stared at me like that sentence was offensive. "You're being dramatic." That word, dramatic, burned a new wound in me. Because what he meant was, "You're inconvenient." Daniel stood behind me, quiet but present, a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. My father left with a stiff jaw, and my mother called later, crying, begging me to reconsider, swearing I was tearing the family apart. But I wasn't the one who made the decision at that party. They did, so I kept my distance. I tried to wash my hands of the family business completely. I told myself I didn't care what happened to it anymore. I didn't want to hear about it, think about it, or be reminded it existed. But life doesn't work like that. Not when the thing you're trying to forget is the thing you helped build, and the people destroying it share your blood. News started finding me anyway. It wasn't formal updates, not the kind you'd read in a newsletter. It was scraps, texts, offhand comments, the kind of information that slips out when people assume you're still connected, still invested. The first time it happened, I was standing in a grocery store aisle trying to decide between two brands of pasta sauce. An absurdly normal moment for someone who used to negotiate six-figure contracts before lunch. My phone buzzed. A text from Gavin, one of the senior managers who'd stayed behind. "Evelyn, I don't know if you want to hear this, but Mike fired 3 senior employees today. Said they didn't vibe with his vision." I stared at the screen. 3 senior employees. People who'd been there since the early years. People who knew the company inside out. People who could walk into a client meeting blindfolded and still close the deal. And Mike fired them because they didn't vibe. My first reaction was a laugh. Short, sharp, humorless. Not because it was funny. Because it was so predictable, it hurt. Mike didn't understand how a business survives. He thought leadership was a brand. Aesthetic, energy, buzzwords. I texted Gavin back, "Are you okay?" He replied almost instantly, "No, it's a mess." That word, mess, hit harder than it should have. Because I knew what it meant. It meant the operations were fraying. It meant clients were being neglected. It meant deadlines were slipping. It meant employees were walking on eggshells, trying not to become the next bad vibe. And I knew exactly what came next when you run a company on vibes. You lose trust. Then you lose people. Then you lose money. Then you lose everything. The next piece of news came a week later. Another former coworker called me, voice tense, like he was checking whether he was allowed to tell me. "He's rewriting contracts," he said. "What do you mean rewriting?" I asked, though my stomach already tightened. "He's changing terms, shortening timelines, adding clauses the clients never agreed to. And he keeps saying, they'll adapt, they need us." I closed my eyes. Clients don't adapt to being disrespected. They leave. I'd spent years building those relationships with patience and humility, the kind my father never appreciated because he only saw results, not the careful tending it took to get them. I'd taken clients to dinners and listened to their worries. I'd smoothed over their frustrations. I'd protected the company's reputation like it was a living thing. And Mike was stomping through it like a child with muddy shoes. Still, I tried to stay detached. I told myself it wasn't my job anymore. I told Daniel, "I don't care." But he'd look at me with that quiet knowledge and say, "You don't care about them. You care about what you built." And that was the part that made it complicated. Because he was right. Then came the real kicker. The kind of news that doesn't just bruise a business, it poisons it. Financial fraud. I didn't hear it from my parents. Of course I didn't. I heard it from an old client who'd always trusted me enough to be honest. "Evelyn," he said on the phone, voice low, "I thought you should know. Your family's company is being investigated." My chest went tight. Investigated for what? He hesitated, like he didn't even want to say it out loud. "They inflated numbers, tried to impress a bigger client. It triggered an audit. Now there's legal trouble." I went silent. Mike, he'd tried to pad financials like he was writing a college paper and needed the numbers to look pretty. A rookie mistake. The kind of thing that screams, "I'm desperate and I don't know what I'm doing." And the fallout? Immediate. Brutal. The company's reputation, shredded. Clients bailed in waves. Lawsuits started piling up like bricks. Hearing it felt like watching a train wreck in slow motion. On one hand, I felt vindicated. I'd warned them. I'd told my father Mike wasn't ready. I'd begged him to consider reality over pride. They didn't listen. So yes, there was a bitter satisfaction in realizing I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't overreacted. But on the other hand, it hurt, because that company wasn't just my father's legacy. It was a piece of my life. 12 years of my effort, my sacrifices, my nights staring at spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. Watching it crumble felt like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a house you built with your own hands. And the worst part? My parents still defended him. "He's under pressure," my mom told a mutual friend, according to Gavin. "He's adjusting. He just needs time." Time. The man had nearly destroyed the company in less than 6 months. How much more time did they plan to sacrifice to their pride? And then there was my sister, Lauren, Mike's mother, the woman who smiled at the party like she'd finally won a war I didn't know we were fighting. She was his biggest cheerleader through all of it, acting like he was a misunderstood genius instead of a reckless kid playing CEO. I didn't know if she was genuinely delusional or just too proud to admit she'd pushed my parents into a disaster. Either way, it made my blood boil, because she hadn't just backed her son. She'd helped erase me. One day, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store, because apparently life loves irony. They greeted me brightly, like nothing had happened. "Evelyn, it must be so exciting to see the next generation taking over the business." I smiled politely, because old habits die hard. "Exciting isn't the word I'd use," I said. They laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. In a strange way, watching the company implode felt cathartic. Like the universe was holding up a mirror and saying, "See, you weren't wrong." But I didn't revel in their failure. Not really. Mostly I felt tired. Tired of being pulled back into a story I'd tried to leave. So I started focusing on what came next. My own future. My own work. My own life. I began sketching ideas for my own business. Something I could build from the ground up without anyone else's interference. Something that didn't require begging for approval or swallowing disrespect. Daniel encouraged me with that steady belief of his. "You already know how to run a company," he said one night, leaning against the kitchen counter while I scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad. "I know how to run their company," I muttered. He shook his head. "No, you know how to run a company. Period. They just convinced you it belonged to them." That sentence landed somewhere deep, because it was true. For the first time in years, I felt something like control. Meanwhile, my parents were scrambling. Mutual acquaintances said they were trying to contain the damage, restore trust, salvage whatever remained. But once trust breaks in business, it doesn't glue back together neatly. And with lawsuits piling up, they were facing something bigger than embarrassment. They were facing collapse. As for Mike, I didn't know how he was handling it. Some people said he was still pretending everything was under control. Others whispered he was on the verge of a breakdown. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. By the time 6 months had passed, the company was a shadow of what it had been. Clients gone. Employees fleeing. Reputation poisoned. My parents hadn't reached out directly, not yet, but I knew it was coming. I could feel it in the air, like thunder before the storm. And I told myself over and over, when they come, you don't owe them salvation. Still, late at night, when Daniel was asleep beside me and the room was dark, my mind would drift to the people left behind. The staff who'd trusted me, the clients who'd relied on me, and the business I'd helped build. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, feeling the old conflict twist in my chest. Because part of me wanted to save it, not for my parents, not for Lauren, and certainly not for Mike, but for the version of me who'd poured her life into it. And that was the part I didn't know how to silence. Then, one evening, as I was rinsing dishes at the sink, my phone buzzed again. A message from Gavin. "Evelyn, they're coming. Your parents are asking for your address." My hands went still. Water running. Heart pounding. Daniel looked up from the couch. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. "They're finally desperate enough to stop pretending," I whispered. And deep down, I knew the storm had arrived. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's breathing even out beside me, my mind running through every version of what tomorrow could bring. Every possible sentence my parents might use, every excuse, every apology that wouldn't actually be an apology. When the knock finally came the next afternoon, it was softer than I expected. Not the sharp, demanding knock my father used when he was annoyed. This one was hesitant, careful. Like they already knew they didn't have the right to be here. I looked through the peephole before opening the door. They looked smaller. My dad's shoulders were hunched in a way I'd never seen before, his posture no longer confident, no longer commanding. My mom's eyes were red, her lipstick slightly smudged, as if she'd reapplied it too many times trying to look composed. For a second, just a second, I considered not opening the door at all. But I did, because I wanted to see it. The cost. "Evelyn," my dad said, his voice stiff. "Can we come in?" I didn't answer. I just stepped aside. They walked into my living room like guests who didn't know where to put their hands, like strangers in a space that wasn't theirs anymore. Daniel was in the kitchen, pretending to reorganize a cabinet that didn't need reorganizing. He met my eyes briefly, asking without words if I wanted him there. I nodded once. He stayed. I sat across from my parents, arms crossed, spine straight, waiting. My mom broke first. She always did. "We need your help," she said, her voice trembling like she expected me to rush in and reassure her. I didn't. She swallowed hard. "The business is It's in trouble. In trouble. Like it had a flat tire instead of multiple lawsuits and a hemorrhaging reputation. She glanced at my dad as if hoping he'd soften it somehow. He rubbed his temples. Mike's in over his head, he admitted. The company is losing clients. There are legal issues. We're barely holding on. I watched their faces carefully. Not guilt. Not accountability. Desperation. And that difference mattered. I let the silence stretch until my mom shifted uncomfortably. What do you expect me to do about it? I finally asked. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. My mom leaned forward, reaching for my hand like muscle memory had taken over. You know the business better than anyone, she said. You always have. We need you to come back. I pulled my hand away. Why don't you ask Mike? I said quietly. He's the CEO. Let him fix it. My dad's jaw tightened. He can't, he snapped before catching himself. He's tried, but this is bigger than him now. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. Cleanly. This is bigger than him, I repeated. You made it bigger than me when you passed me over like I didn't exist. My dad exhaled heavily, sinking back into the chair. We made a mistake, he said. We see that now. There it was. The sentence I'd waited years to hear. And it didn't feel the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. You didn't just make a mistake, I said, standing up. You made a choice, over and over again. And now you want me to clean it up. My mom's eyes filled with tears. We were wrong, she whispered. We should have trusted you. Please, Evelyn, it's not too late. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. You think I can just walk back in there? I asked, pacing the room. That I can wave a magic wand and undo 6 months of damage? Do you even hear yourselves? Here. They stayed quiet. So I kept going. You didn't trust me when things were stable, when the company was healthy, when I was holding everything together. But now that you're desperate, suddenly I'm good enough? My dad stood up, his voice sharp. This isn't about you. I turned on him instantly. It was always about me. You just didn't care until I stopped being useful. My mom started crying then. Real crying. Not the performative kind. For a moment, it almost worked. For a moment, the daughter in me wavered. Then I remembered the party. The applause. The way my sister smiled. The way my father said Mike's name without hesitation. I can't help you, I said finally, and I won't. My dad's face hardened. So that's it? You're turning your back on your family? I met his eyes, steady. You turned your back on me first. They left not long after that. No shouting. No dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of a door closing on something that had already been broken for a long time. When they were gone, my knees finally buckled. Daniel was there instantly, arms around me, grounding me. You did the right thing, he said softly. I nodded against his shoulder, even as my chest ached. Because walking away from the company had been hard. Walking away from my parents? That was harder. But that night, lying in bed, I felt something unexpected beneath the grief. Clarity. I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. And for the first time since that birthday party, I stopped waiting for them to understand. After my parents left, something inside me finally went quiet. Not numb. Resolved. For months, my life had felt like it was paused between two versions of myself. The woman who had given 12 years to someone else's dream, and the woman who hadn't yet decided what her own dream looked like. That night, lying awake beside Daniel, I made the decision. If I wasn't going back, then I was going forward. All the way. Starting a business from scratch is terrifying, in a way people don't talk about. Not the flashy, inspirational kind of fear, but the quiet kind that sits in your chest at 3 a.m. and asks questions like, what if I fail? What if they were right about me? What if this only worked before because I had their name behind me? I didn't have a fancy office. I didn't have investors. I didn't even have a fully formed plan. What I had was 12 years of experience, a legal pad filled with ideas, and a stubborn need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I wasn't disposable. The industry was obvious. It was what I knew. But I didn't want to recreate my father's company. I didn't want the same culture, the same cold efficiency, the same way people were treated like replaceable parts. I wanted to build something human, something where relationships mattered, where employees weren't terrified of saying the wrong thing, where clients weren't numbers on a spreadsheet, but people whose trust meant something. The first thing I did was reach out to a handful of old clients, not the ones who'd followed my parents out of loyalty or obligation, but the ones I'd worked with directly, the ones who called me when something went wrong, the ones who'd once said, if you ever start your own thing, let us know. I was nervous making those calls. My hand actually shook the first time I dialed. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. It's Evelyn. I'm starting something new. No pressure. I just wanted to see if you'd be open to talking. There was a pause on the other end, then a laugh. "We were wondering how long it would take," one of them said. "Mike's been a disaster. We've been waiting for someone competent to step up." That sentence did something to me. It loosened the knot I'd been carrying since the birthday party. They remembered me. They trusted me. By the end of the week, 3 clients had agreed to work with me. By the end of the second week, 5 more reached out on their own. I hadn't even officially launched yet. Then came the team. I'd stayed in touch with a few former coworkers, the ones who'd been quietly miserable under Mike's leadership. People who'd watched the company unravel from the inside and were just waiting for a lifeline. I called them one by one. "I'm putting something together," I said. "It's small right now, scrappy, no guarantees, but I believe in it." The responses came faster than I expected. "I'm in. I already quit. When do we start?" "I've been hoping you'd do this." Within weeks, I had a small but solid team. No corner offices, no titles carved into glass doors, just shared desks, coffee runs, and a shared sense of we're building something real. We rented space in a shared office downtown, folding desks, secondhand chairs, whiteboards that still had someone else's half-erased brainstorming on them. And yet, it felt more alive than anything I'd experienced in years. Setting everything up was chaos. Registering the business, hiring a designer for the website, setting up accounts, marketing ourselves without sounding like a clone of my father's company. Some nights I worked until my eyes burned. Other nights I sat on the couch staring at my laptop, wondering if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Daniel worried about me. "You're going to burn out," he said one night as I hunched over contracts at the kitchen table. "I know," I replied, rubbing my temples. "But if I don't push now, it won't take off." He didn't argue. He just kissed my forehead and made sure there was food in the fridge and coffee ready in the morning. That kind of support, the quiet kind, was everything. The first deal we closed felt surreal. I stared at the signed documents like they might disappear if I blinked. Then came the second. Then the third. Clients started giving feedback. "This feels different," one said. "More personal, like the old days." That word, old, used to make me flinch. Now it felt like validation. We weren't exploding with growth, and I didn't want to. I'd seen what chasing growth at all costs did to people. We were steady, intentional. By the end of the second month, we'd outgrown the shared workspace. When I walked into the empty office, we were considering leasing. Sunlight pouring through bare windows, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off the walls. I felt something shift. This wasn't borrowed. This wasn't temporary. This was mine. Meanwhile, I couldn't avoid hearing about my parents' company. Employees quitting, clients leaving, legal bills piling up. Former coworkers started coming to me. "If you're hiring, let me know. I can't stay there anymore. We always trusted you." I wasn't poaching. They were choosing. And that distinction mattered. One afternoon, as I sat at my new desk, my desk, I realized something important. I wasn't building this to prove my parents wrong. I wasn't building it to outshine Mike. I was building it because I finally understood my own worth. And once you understand that, you don't need permission anymore. Success has a way of echoing back to the people who never wanted you to have it. At first, it came in the form of silence breaking. Emails from my dad, short, careful, always ending with some version of "we need to talk." I didn't reply. Then my mom started calling. Once a week, then twice, then every few days. I never picked up. Eventually, she left a voicemail that made my chest tighten the moment I heard her voice. "I hope you're happy," she said, the words shaking with barely contained anger. "You're tearing this family apart. I don't know how you can live with yourself." I deleted it without responding. Because what was there to say? I hadn't torn anything apart. I'd simply stopped holding it together with my bare hands. Things escalated after that. Not emotionally. Legally. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my office door by the building receptionist. Cream-colored, thick, official. I opened it standing up, coffee cooling on my desk. Halfway through the first paragraph, my stomach dropped. It was from a lawyer. Cease and desist. They accused me of stealing clients, of poaching employees, of deliberately undermining the family business. According to the letter, I was violating some vague, unwritten family agreement and was required to shut down operations immediately or face legal action. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was desperate. There was no non-compete clause. I'd checked when I resigned. Twice. They had no legal standing whatsoever. But the fact that my sister, Lauren, had resorted to this, that told me everything. She wasn't trying to protect the business. She was trying to punish me for surviving without them. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer with a single line. "Handle this." He called me later that afternoon. "Empty threat," he said. They're bluffing. Let them waste their money. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt tired. Because once a family turns to intimidation, there's no going back to pretending it was ever just about love. A few days later, they showed up at my office, unannounced. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant knocked gently on the glass wall. "Evelyn, your parents are here." Of course they were. I stepped out into this common area and saw them standing there like they owned the place. My mom's eyes scanned the office with thinly veiled disdain. Clean lines, open desks, people actually smiling while they worked. My dad's expression was something else. Anger. And something like fear. "So this is it," he said, gesturing around. "You really think this is going to work?" I folded my arms. "It already is." "You're playing a dangerous game," he snapped. "You're dividing clients, employees. You're destroying what's left of this family." I met his gaze evenly. "What destroyed this family," I said, "was you choosing control over respect." My mom's face flushed. "You're ruining everything," she said sharply. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to us?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice, not out of fear, but finality. "What I'm doing," I said, "is building something you didn't think I was capable of. And if that scares you, that's not my responsibility." They didn't stay long after that. There were no apologies, no breakthroughs, just the realization, on all sides, that this power dynamic had shifted permanently. After they left, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the city outside the window. It finally clicked. They weren't angry because they were losing the business. They were angry because they were losing me. For years, I'd been the dependable one, the fixer, the silent stabilizer, the daughter who sacrificed without complaint. And now, they couldn't control me anymore. Meanwhile, the situation at my parents' company continued to spiral. Employees were quitting in droves. Lawsuits were draining what little cash remained. Mike, from what I heard, barely showed up to the office anymore. One former coworker told me they'd seen him at a bar in the middle of the day. Another said he'd stopped answering emails altogether. I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt angry at the adults who'd put him there. Through it all, I kept my focus where it belonged, on my own company. We were growing, slowly, intentionally. I hired a small marketing firm. Inquiries doubled, then tripled. One night, I was reviewing financials at home when Daniel came in with 2 glasses of ginger ale. "I don't think I've ever seen you this happy," he said, sitting beside me. I set the papers down and smiled. "It feels different," I admitted. "This isn't about proving anything anymore." He rested his head against my shoulder. "You deserve this." And for the first time, I believed it. Because this wasn't about beating my family. It was about choosing myself. And I wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. By the time autumn settled in, the remnants of my old life had started to feel distant, like a house you once lived in that someone else had repainted and rearranged beyond recognition. My business was steady now, not perfect, not effortless, but real. We'd moved into a larger office, hired 3 more people, signed clients I never would have dreamed of working with a year earlier. Daniel had started talking, carefully, like he didn't want to spook me, about scaling back his own job and joining me full-time someday. The idea didn't scare me. It grounded me. Still, the past had a way of drifting back through cracks I didn't know were still open. News about my parents' company filtered in through mutual acquaintances, never directly, never formally. Mike had finally cracked. The lawsuits drained the company dry. The loss of key clients meant revenue was barely trickling in. My dad was forced to liquidate assets just to keep the doors open. One afternoon, a former client called me, not to ask for business, just to tell me something he thought I should know. "They sold the building," he said. I stopped walking. "The office?" I asked. "Yeah, the original one." That building had been there since day one. The place where my dad and I worked side by side when we had more ambition than money. Where I'd slept on a couch during crunch weeks. Where we'd celebrated our first big win with cheap champagne and paper cups. Selling it felt like erasing a chapter. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally. After I hung up, I sat in my car longer than necessary, staring at nothing. Not sad, just aware. A few weeks later, something unexpected landed in my inbox. An email from my dad. The subject line read, "An apology." I almost deleted it. Curiosity won. I opened it. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't flowery. They were quiet. He wrote about pride, about listening to my sister because it was easier than admitting he might be wrong, about believing that youth and credentials could replace experience. He admitted, plainly, that I'd been the one who deserved the role, that the company wouldn't have survived without me, that he was sorry he hadn't said it when it mattered. I sat there for a long time after finishing the email. Years ago, I would have cried reading something like that, Now, I felt tired, not angry, not vindicated, just aware of the timing. Apologies don't undo damage when they arrive after the collapse. They don't restore trust. They don't give back years. I didn't reply. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something I owed on demand. Meanwhile, my business kept growing. Clients who'd stayed loyal to my parents' company out of habit eventually reached out. Not with guilt, but with relief. "We need stability," they said. "We trust you." And I gave it to them. As for Mike, the last I heard, he'd moved back in with my sister. The lawsuits were settled, but the financial damage was irreversible. His reputation burned before it ever had a chance to mature. I didn't wish him harm, but I didn't feel responsible for him either. My sister, predictably, wasn't handling the fallout well. From what I heard, she blamed everyone but herself. My parents had stopped defending her publicly. That silence spoke volumes. One evening, as the city lights flickered on outside my office window, I leaned back in my chair and let myself breathe. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from expectations, free from manipulation, free from having to earn love through sacrifice. I wasn't building my life to prove anyone wrong anymore. I was building it because it was mine. I don't know if I'll ever fully reconcile with my family. Maybe someday, maybe not. What I do know is this: walking away didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. And for the first time, the future belongs to me.